We'll be starting the chapter. There's no number of chapters in here. It's called Cape Girardeau, Missouri, USA, 1941. And the book is Magic Eyes Only by Ryan S. Wood. The initial data in support of this case can largely be traced back to Leonard Stringfield's book UFO Crash Retrievals, The Inner Sanctum Status Report 4, in which he shared the contents of a letter from Charlotte Mann, the granddaughter of Reverend William Huffman, a traveling Baptist minister who had moved to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, to live and began ministering at the Red Star Baptist Church in early 1941. According to church records, Mann's letters to Springfield recounted the deathbed confession of her grandmother who, during the course of several days, described an unusual event that Reverend Huffman apparently attended late one early spring night, just 10 to 15 miles by car outside of Cape Girardeau in 1941. According to the deathbed confession to Mann, when Huffman arrived at the scene, police officers, fire department personnel, FBI agents, and photographers were already in attendance. Huffman was reportedly asked to provide blessings to the 3 dead occupants of the craft. During this process, Huffman allegedly observed a command module with hieroglyphic writing inside and prayed over each of the obviously non-human entities. When the military arrived on the scene, said Mann, everyone was sworn to secrecy. However, upon returning home to 1530 Main Street, the Reverend chose to share his story with his wife and family. It was this retelling of events that night to his wife, Floyd and Charlotte would have that Charlotte would hear from her grandmother years later in 1984. Over the course of several days, as she lay dying of cancer, as principal researcher, this author has investigated the case extensively and finds it important to note that this is not the only time Charlotte was exposed to this story. During her childhood, she hears bits and pieces during conversations with her father and uncle. When Floyd was dying, Charlotte pressed her to fill in the specific details as to what really happened that spring evening in 1941. It took a fair amount of pleading with her grandmother initially to convince her to violate the commitment she had made to her husband not to speak of it. Eventually, Charlotte succeeded in extracting the story. She kept after the story for several days, clarifying with her grandmother until Charlotte was confident that she completely understood what happened. Starting with Stringfield's report and later personally meeting Charlotte, this author became convinced that here was a credible witness. This author became convinced that here was a credible witness and bizarre story that was in dire need of validation. In an interview, Charlotte Mann provided greater detail regarding the alleged incident at Cape Girardeau, including extraordinary details of a photograph purportedly taken at the crash site that showed one of the recovered alien bodies. I saw the picture originally from my dad, who had gotten it from my grandfather, who was a Baptist minister in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, in the spring of 41. I saw the picture and asked my grandmother at a later time. She was at my home fatally ill with cancer, so we had a frank discussion. She said that grandfather was called out in the spring of 1941 in the evening around 9 to 9:30. That someone had been called out to a plane crash outside of town and would he be willing to go to minister to people there, which he did, not died. Upon arrival, it was a very different situation. It was not a conventional aircraft as we know it. He described it as a saucer that was metallic in color, no seams, did not look like anything he had seen. It had been broken open in one portion, and so he could walk up and see that. In looking in, he saw a small metal chair, gauges and dials and things he had never seen. However, what impressed him most was around the inside there were inscriptions and writings which he said he did not recognize, but were similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics. There were 3 entities or non-human people lying on the ground. 2 were just outside the saucer, and the third one was further out. His understanding was that perhaps the third one was not dead on impact. There had been mention of a ball of fire, yet there was fire around the crash site, but none of the entities had been burned, and so grandfather did pray over them, giving them last rites. There were many people there, fire people, photographers, and so they lifted up 1 and 2 men on either side, stood him up, and they stretched his arms out. They had him up under the armpits and out here. As I recalled from the picture I saw, he was about 4 feet tall, appeared to have no bone structure, soft looking. He had a suit on, or we assumed it was a suit. It could have been his skin, and that looked like crinkled soft aluminum foil. I recall it had very long hands, very long fingers, and I think there were 3, but I cannot swear to that. Other living supporting witnesses included Charlie Mann's sister, who confirmed her story in a notarized, sworn affidavit, and the brother of the Cape Girardeau County Sheriff in 1941, Clarence R. Shade. Before presenting testimony further below, it may be useful, especially for readers realizing the weight of UFO evidence for the first time, to ask whether they are public, authentic documents that support and corroborate the hypothesis of the pre-Roswell crash retrieval event. Let us quickly survey documents that have emerged from multiple leaked sources as well as from official government archives in recent years. Readers who seek more can find voluminous records and analysis at www.majesticdocuments.com. MAJESTIC documents.com. 7 leaked documents from 3 sources since 1994 provide both direct and indirect support for crash retrieval events in the possible time frame recounted by Reverend Huffman. As previously noted, documentary evidence comes in a March 1942 memo about the February 1942 so-called LA air raid. For about an hour, over Los Angeles, a slow-moving disc-shaped craft was illuminated with spotlights, and 1,430 rounds of ammunition were fired at it with many clear direct hits, according to witnesses. If nothing else, the Army was chagrined that such an extensive aerial barrage had resulted in some deaths and property destruction from falling debris and exploded shells. General George C. Marshall then wrote a top-secret memo to President Roosevelt about this event, requesting an investigation of military records of unconventional aerial phenomenon, dating back to 1897, a likely reference to the Aurora airship case. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover may have also weighed in on the Los Angeles case in a handwritten note on an FBI memo about UFOs dated 10 July 1947, at the end of a declassified memo requesting involvement with the Air Force's UFO cases. Hoover writes, "I will do it, but before agreeing to it, we must insist on full access to discs recovered. For instance, in the LA case, the Army grabbed it and would not let us have it for cursory examination. The research question is whether Hoover's note concerns Los Angeles because of the air raid Los Alamos. The research question is whether Hoover's note concerns Los Angeles because of the air raid, Los Alamos because that is where Roswell wreckage was taken, or Louisiana. Odds favor Louisiana because this is the right mailing format for the time. LA and Hoover was very good about his capitalization and initials, but it may have referred to Los Angeles. In any case, it is more evidence for pre-Roswell crash events. Another document, annotated 24 September 1947, a classified Magic Eyes Only, discusses evidence deemed extraterrestrial in nature and makes specific reference to a discovery in 1941. Several pages further, the document comments. Even the recovery case of 1941 did not create a unified intelligence effort to exploit possible technological gains, with the exception of the Manhattan Project. There is no mistaking that the document refers to crashed UFOs, as it is titled Mission Assessment of Recovered Lenticular Aerodyne Objects and Implications in 5 parts, and focused on the Project White Hot Intelligence Estimate Preliminary, examining UFO recovery in 1947 from Socorro, New Mexico. This ULAT-1, unidentified lenticular-shaped aerodyne technology, was assessed as the product of an advanced culture from another planet that is much older than ours and has utilized the science and intellect for interplanetary space travel. The document puts the 1947 event, Roswell, in the historical context of an earlier crash recovery in 1941. Charlotte Mann knew nothing of this leaked document, so it is remarkable that her testimony about an event in 1941, years before the now highly publicized events of 1947, is corroborated. Stunning indication of pre-Roswell events comes from a leaked letter in which President Franklin D. Roosevelt writes to General George C. Marshall on February 27, 1942, "I have considered the disposition of the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a super weapon of war. Consultation with Dr. Bush and other scientists on the issue of finding practical uses for the atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices," written only days after the LA air raid and its associated UFO recoveries, there would have been no time to discern atomic secrets learned from study of celestial devices. Note the plural. So the president must be referring to even earlier recoveries of multiple craft. Key documents in the trove that Dr. Wood and this author have carefully investigated were leaked primarily by anonymous sources, sending them to the mailbox of UFO researcher Tim Cooper. Tim provided them and has cooperated closely with us in a dramatic development. However, one of the principal sources, an elderly man using the name Thomas C.Y. Cantwell, not only sent Tim documents, but finally initiated brief face-to-face contact. While Tim was never able to trace him further, the source provided highly credible comments about his career in intelligence. In a letter dated January 30th, 1966, the mysterious source writes a short sentence about the aerodyne recovered in 1941 that crashed in southwestern Missouri and the one captured in 1942 in Louisiana. We note the never heard that word, don't we? We note the adjective southwestern rather than the presumable correct southeastern if it is referring to Cape Girardeau. Is this just an innocent mistake by a nearly 90-year-old man misremembering or mistyping, or is he misdirecting us from the true event? Note that other can't-wheel statements have provided valid information in the past. His comment here may correlate with J. Edgar Hoover's possible reference to a disc recovered in Louisiana. This raises the ever-nagging question in UFO research: how do we know that these fantastic statements and documents are authentic? Key evidence for authenticity is format and language. We will not exhaust the subject here, but those wanting more than a summary can assess Dr. Wood's and this author's studies online. For example, General Marshall's memo leading to creation of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit uses exactly the right document numbering system, as only 2 weeks after the memo was written, Marshall's office switched from OCS Office of the Chief of Staff numbering system to the War Department system. Beyond this, unfortunately, we do not have the original paper and ink to test. A memorandum from President Roosevelt addressed to the Non-Terrestrial Science and Technology Committee dated February 22, 1944 says that application of non-terrestrial known how in atomic energy is important, but that until the war is won, our principal object is not to engage in exploratory research of this kind, but to win the war as soon as possible. Later, after victory, writes the President, funds can be devoted to understanding non-terrestrial science and its technology. This implies that the U.S. had such technology in hand. The President commends the committee under Dr. Vannevar Bush. The document is signed in the President's own hand and marked double top secret. Is this not an obvious phony classification that a hoaxer would never use? No. While unconventional and rarely seen, this marking is known to have been used for highly sensitive subjects. In the mission assessment of recovered lenticular aerodyne objects of September 24, 1947, we find period language, highly authentic appearance, and lost my place. Shit. And the authors lament that the craft recoveries have not yet led to a unified intelligence effort, a subtlety unlikely to emerge from whole cloth and insert seamlessly if a hoaxer were seeking to provide just the opposite point, that this subject is in fact real and the subject of intelligence interest. Other areas of convincing content include reference to obscure names, such as the document's inclusion of Captain Charles A. Buchanan on the circulation list. Buchanan is important because he was listed as a member of the mission in the White Hot report during tabulation of President Truman's White House switchboard traffic, who called whom, when, and how often. This author came across the name of Captain Charles Buchanan. He was the only captain ever mentioned in the 1947 phone records, and remarkably, General Carter in the White House called Captain Buchanan on July 7, 1947 at 4:44 p.m., just days after the astonishing reports on July 4th from New Mexico. Returning to Charlotte Mann, several leaked documents above corroborate in broad terms both that UFO crashes and recoveries had occurred and that there were instances even prior to 1947. This was not public knowledge nor generally accepted when Charlotte approached researchers. She spoke her own truth, telling this author, "My grandfather, upon arrival, said there were already several people there on the scene. Two that he assumed were local photographers and fire people. And so, not long after they arrived, military just showed up, surrounded the area, took them off in groups separately, and spoke to each of them. Grandfather didn't know what was said to the others, but he was told, "This didn't happen. You didn't see this. This is national security. It is never to be talked about again." My grandfather was an honorable man, being a preacher. That's all he needed to be said to him. That's all that needed to be said to him. And so he came home and told the story to my dad, who was there, and my grandmother and my uncle. Now, my mother was expecting at the time, so she was off in the bedroom. My sister was born on May 3rd, 1941. So we are assuming this was the middle of the last of April, and he never spoke of it again. But about 2 weeks later, one of the men who had a personal camera that he had put in his shirt pocket approached grandfather and said, I think someone needs a copy of this. I have one and I would like you to keep one." So that's how it came about that grandfather had the picture to begin with, but he never spoke of it again. The other people seemed to be very intimidated and very frightened and paranoid. Given Charlotte Mann's testimony of her grandfather seeing police officers, plainclothes people, and military men at the site, the most appropriate officials would have been the county sheriff, Cape Girardeau, or Jackson. Missouri police departments and associated fire departments, along with the FBI coroner. Since this event happened outside of the town limits, the county sheriff would have been the responsible party. Reuben Reinhold Shade. After his employment at the sheriff's department, Shade went to work for the Southeastern Missourian newspaper. His children have been contacted, as has his brother, Clarence R. Shade, who provided a supportive but not definitive statement when interviewed. "Yes, I heard of a spaceship with little people back a long time ago, but never believed it. Although nowhere near as powerful as the Huffman Man testimony, one might give it partial credit for being a sincere recollection, especially given the wording he used, little people, rather than ET or alien, as used frequently today in popular culture." The Cape Girardeau police chief in 1941 was Marshal F. Morton, who died in 1974. What is interesting about Morton is that after this event he was selected to attend the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and spent 2 years there on and off between 1941 and 1946. Does this appointment seem logical for a very small Midwest town? Taking the issue a step further, just weeks before this UFO crash event outside of Cape Girardeau, the FBI opened an office, ostensibly a satellite from St. Louis, with Special Agent G.B. Norris making the announcement. The agent assigned to this field office is unknown at present. The fire department, under the direction of Chief Carl James Lewis, is potentially one of the most useful sources of information. The fire department kept detailed notes on the fires it went to, including date, time, location, durations, causes of damage, estimates, due to the outstanding research by on-site historical research assistant Margaret Harmon. We have found and secured photocopies of the entire 1941 fire logbook. This official record offers several tantalizing dates for a possible crash event. The testimony has the military coming to swear everyone to secrecy and take away the evidence. Where do they come from? The answer may be just a short 50 miles away. The Skeeston military base. This was not some minor military base at the time, but was the Top Gun flight training base before World War II started. Hundreds of pilots were trained there, and there was also a large contingent of British flight instructors working through a private corporation and not on the direct military payroll. It was logical that some of these soldiers and officers would have been called to initially examine and ultimately manage the transportation and removal of the wreckage back to the base. Besides military guards and truck drivers, most likely the commander, medical officer, and intelligence officer would have either visited the site or seen the wreckage firsthand. We have pictures of many of these individuals and a short history of the main unit, the 309th. At the time of this writing, further details and unit histories are being researched at the National Archives and the St. Louis National Personal Record Center. Ideally, this will pin down precisely the people who have been responsible. After that, the next mission is to find them or their living children. Allegedly, there were 3 dead non-human bodies and they would have needed to be removed. How would that have been done? Little caskets, as in the Roswell case, or field body bags or on stretchers? It is uncertain. It is interesting that one of the local funeral homes at the time was called Cracraft Miller. Cracraft. Cracraft Miller. Cracraft Miller. Cape Girardeau police officer John Cracraft was unlikely involved because everyone on the force would have known about his family connection, especially the coroner. It is logical to believe that if this event is real, many others would have heard about it over the years in secretive conversations or wild tales. Huffman stated, according to his granddaughter Charlotte, that besides military, there were photographers at the scene. One of the most likely candidates was Garland F. Frontenberger. Froney, according to his obituary, he was a photographer for 6 decades, many of them with the Southwestern Missourian newspaper. In 1941, he supported the paper via contract work and was out in the community applying his profession. He had a reputation as a great photographer and surprisingly was a good friend of Senator, later President Harry Truman. Besides being a Baptist and logically attending Reverend Huffman's church, he was known for his color photography of roses, one of Reverend Huffman's horticulture passions. What happened to one of the potentially most important aspects of the case that could turn out to be a true smoking gun? The alleged photograph of one of the retrieved dead alien bodies. This author has delved into this aspect of the story in depth. A genuine alien photograph would be outstanding. Supporting evidence for this case. To review, a few weeks after the event, a photographer who was at the scene approached Huffman and gave him a copy of a photograph depicting 2 police officers and the dead alien being held between them. In a videotaped interview that retold the story of the alien picture and how she came to be aware of it, Charlotte Mann stated, "Well, the first awareness that I had of it is actually a picture that my father had, and it was at a dinner party, and I heard rumors and bits and pieces over conversations, but it was a picture, an old picture, because it was like the old Kodak with the little lines and scallops around it. There were 2 men holding up non-humans, the best way I can describe it, a little entity, a little person who appeared to be about 4 feet tall. They had him under the armpits with arms stretched out on either side of him, and it was difficult to tell if it was skin or a suit. It looked as if he had no bone structure. Very, very long arms. I vaguely remembered 3 fingers, but I couldn't swear to that. He had oval eyes, a slit for a mouth, and it looked like 2 little dots where the ears should be. And his skin looked as if it were soft, crinkly aluminum foil. Not that thick, I remember at the time it making a larger impression on me because of the eyes. So I can't tell you what his feet were like because I didn't see that. Man added, well, it never actually left me. That picture haunted me, and I had heard bits just as a child, bits and pieces of this puzzle. For me, it was a puzzle, and to hear things from my father was one thing, but it was very important that I had validation from a more solid place. So when my grandmother became ill and came to our home while she took chemotherapy, I approached her to speak of it, and 2 times she turned me down. She said, your grandfather said we would never speak of this again, so I won't. And finally, in desperation, I said, Grandmother, this is something that is important for me, and grandfather is gone, and it's been a long time. So then she sat down and filled in all the details, the missing things, as to Cape Girardeau, being the town, the year, in spring. She said light jackets, but not hot, so all of the pieces fell together. Research has uncovered further data on this extraordinary piece of evidence. Charlotte's father, Guy Huffman, had told the crash retrieval story and had offered the photograph as proof to a photographer friend of his in the 1953 through 1955 time frame. The photographer's name was Walter Wayne Fisk. Prominent UFO researcher Stan Friedman also recognized the importance of this picture, tracked Fisk down in New Mexico, and spoke with him on the telephone, where a strange tale emerged. Fisk stated he had a doctorate in psychology, yet Friedman was unable to verify his claim, along with Fisk's statement that he was an advisor to presidents. Fisk had repeatedly refused to answer or respond to phone calls or letters written by Charlotte Mann. Is this the response of a forthcoming man? This author visited Fisk at his home in Albuquerque, where he denied ever receiving the alien picture, yet had a keen interest in UFOs and shared a story of taking photographs of a daylight UFO up close out of the State Department window. During our 30-minute visit, he stated he was a surgeon rather than a psychologist, as Stan Friedman had heard. Perhaps Fisk will eventually break his silence, and we will get an answer concerning to what happened to the picture, or we will get the no comment statement or similar brush off. Either way, it is vital that this aspect of the case be resolved. Now we come to other concrete questions. When may be easier than where, but as of this writing, solid progress has been made on both questions. We know from Charlotte's testimony that Huffman was driven about 10 to 15 miles outside of town and then had to walk about 1/4 of a mile or so off the road into an open field where a fire was burning. Given these basic parameters, the search area has narrowed to about 5 square miles, actually areas adjacent to roads at the time. Historical aerial photography is available for October 1941 and provides a complete stereoscopic overflight of the area. One area looks promising. This target area was visited in August 2000 with metal detectors. However, nothing of significance was recovered. Other locations identified by dowsers in the aerial photography have not yet been visited. Nevertheless, there are encouraging leads. The fire department records for Cape Girardeau are very precise. Although there is no clear stunning match with Charlotte's story, there are several good candidates according to the story. The fire department was on the site. But which one, Jackson or Cape Girardeau or both? If they were sworn to secrecy by the military, would they write the event down in their logbook or would they record it accurately? At present, all we have is the Cape Girardeau Fire Logbook for 1941. An examination of fires in the event for late March and April show only few possible matches. On March 30th, from 6:22 p.m. to 6:58 p.m. in Hucock Woods, on April 22nd, from 11:59 p.m. to 4:35 a.m. at the Blattner Brothers residence out on Highway 61. Again, the right area. It will take a review of the historical aerial photography to verify these fires. Charlotte's testimony is that it happened one evening in April 1941 because her mother was pregnant with her sister, who was born on May 3rd of 1941. At this time, the precise location and date is unconfirmed, and further research with police, military records, and fire call logs is planned along with aerial photography and ground surveys. Although of speculative value without confirmation, Joe McGonigal of Intuitive Intelligence Applications provided remote viewing data purporting that there are small pieces of wreckage still at the crash site that are recoverable. Annette Martin, another well-known psychic sleuth, confirmed how much of the Huffman Man story and provided new checkable data. What is the overall assessment of what may be one of the earliest credible reports of an alleged UFO crash on U.S. soil? After working on this case for about 2 years and talking with Charlotte Mann on numerous occasions, either by phone, over dinner, or in front of the television camera, this author has found no hints of deception or confabulation in her story or demeanor. Like Leonard Stringfield, 10 years earlier, this author concludes that Charlotte is a very sincere woman with a quality case worthy of a dedicated effort at validation. The story does not hinge on Charlotte's testimony alone. There are tangible recollections from credible people that loosely support the event, like that of Clarence Shade. Then there is the deliberate silence of Wayne Fisk, the last person to have handled the alien picture. Adding more weight to the truth is the highly believable and likely authentic military and presidential documents that support a crash retrieval in 1941. It is the totality of these facts that lead one to reasonably conclude there was a crash event as described by Reverend Huffman's wife to Charlotte Mann. The implications of this case is fully proven, are part of the larger picture, namely extraterrestrial visitors are real. Certain factions of the government have been hiding this fact since at least 1941, and the subject has been a matter of grave concern to several presidents. The recovered technology from this crash was funneled into the Manhattan Project, according to the leaked white-hot report Magic Eyes Only. Even the recovery case of 1941 did not create a unified intelligence effort to exploit possible technological gains, with the exception of the Manhattan Project. Given this statement in 1947, it is logical to believe that government insiders were lamenting the lack of aggressive military exploitation of the ET hardware, but it is global society that has been cheated, e.g., no doctorates of alien exobiology have been awarded or gravity control companies founded. Ironically, it may not be society that benefits from this event, but the city of Cape Girardeau, as tourists flock to visit the site and learn more about a special time and place in history. The final resolution to this case is still out there. It may come in the form of physical evidence, bits of wreckage, new witnesses, historical aerial photography, soil samples, or archival research. All these fronts are being actively worked, and there is reason to predict success. And that's it for that bit. I guess we'll do the next one. It's a quarter page. Carolinas, USA, October 1941. From investigator Walter Webb comes the story of Guy Simeon, one who served with the 26th Infantry Division prior to America's entry into the Second World War, and who in October 1941 was taking part in a huge military wargame maneuver in the Carolinas when an unidentified object crashed in the region. According to Webb, he has been informed of the fact that Simeon's mother had some knowledge of her son's involvement in the event, which focused upon a crashed round metallic object and a reference to little dead bodies from space. Webb concludes, taking everything into account, I believe that Simeon episode should be classified as a tentative unknown. And the next one, very short as well. Last one was Carolinas, USA, October 1941. This one is north of Georgia, USA, 1942. Mary Nunn, pseudonym, reportedly served in a key civil capacity during the Second World War, according to Leonard Stringfield, and imparted knowledge that Stringfield himself admitted was sketchy of an event that Nunn stated occurred north of Georgia in 1942 and that involved the crash and retrieval by the U.S. military of an alien spacecraft. The object was generally round in shape, 15 feet wide and 10 feet high. Reportedly, a number of small creatures were found alive within the vehicle and displayed bug eyes, a lack of hair, and milky white skin. All died shortly after the recovery and transfer of the object to an unspecified location. Here's the footnotes. UFO crash retrieval search for proof in a Hall of Mirrors status report 7, Leonard Stringfield, 1994. Through the years, descriptions of alien entities have varied and will not be discussed in detail here. Yet it is certain that leaked documents and witness testimony has included this dramatic element in reports of UFO crash retrievals. Given the patterns of reports over time, it is quite possible that multiple species have emerged across the vast universe where intelligent life could emerge. The SOM 101 Special Operations Manual refers to 2 species, see appendix. Though it is possible that some life may not resemble humans at all, humanoid morphology is a very logical apparatus and could evolve in many other places than planet Earth. It allows, for example, stereo vision and hearing, limbs free to manipulate objects, other limbs able to provide simultaneous locomotion, and a convenient container for the brain near the eyes and ears with an elegant network of nerves. The most commonly discussed beings are slender, gray-skinned, long-limbed, large-headed creatures with large oval eyes. We have no certain photographs, though intriguing images do exist. One of the most intriguing is printed here for the first time in this book's photo section. Next one is Los Angeles Air Raid. It's short enough, I suppose. Los Angeles Air Raid, California, USA, February 25th, 1942. The devastating Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor of December 7th, 1941 was still fresh in the minds of every American citizen when, in the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942, a nightmare scenario began to unfold. The city of Los Angeles, on the U.S. mainland, seemed to be under attack. There is no question that something in the sky that night provided a wartime blackout, then a spectacular barrage of anti-aircraft fire from coastal batteries. Here is how a historian for the U.S. Air Force described the incident. During the night of the 24th through 25th of February 1942, unidentified objects caused a succession of alerts in Southern California. On the 24th, a warning issued by naval intelligence indicated that an attack could be expected within the next 10 hours. That evening, a large number of flares and blinking lights were reported from the vicinity of defense plants. An alert call at the 7:18 p.m. Pacific Time was lifted at the 22:23. The time and the tension temporarily relaxed. But early in the morning of the 25th, renewed activity began. Radars picked up an unidentified target 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft batteries were alerted at the 0215 and were put on green alert, ready to fire. A few minutes later, the AAF kept its pursuit planes on the ground, preferring to await indications of the scale and direction of any attack before committing its limited fighter force. Radars tracked the approaching target to within a few miles of the coast, and at 0221, the regional controller ordered a blackout. Thereafter, the information center was flooded with reports of enemy planes, even though the mysterious objects tracked in from sea seems to have vanished. At 0243, planes were reported near Long Beach, and a few minutes later, a Coast Artillery colonel spotted about 25 planes at 12,000 feet over Los Angeles. At 0306, a balloon carrying a red flare was seen over Santa Monica, and 4 batteries of anti-aircraft artillery opened fire, whereupon the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano. From this point on, reports were hopelessly at variance. Swarms of planes, or sometimes balloons, of all possible sizes, numbering from 1 to several hundred, traveling at altitudes which ranged from a few thousand feet to more than 20,000, and flying at speeds which were said to have varied from very slow to over 200 miles an hour, were observed to parade across the skies. These mysterious forces dropped no bombs, and despite the fact that 1,440 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition, others say 1,430 rounds, were directed against them, suffered no losses. There were reports, to be sure, that 4 enemy planes had been shot down, and one supposed to have landed in flames at a Hollywood intersection. The foregoing official version of the story concludes that the whole incident was caused by misidentification of innocuous things like weather balloons, trailing flares, coupled with a severe outbreak of jittery wartime nerves. Nonetheless, a secret memorandum to President Roosevelt from General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff, released under the Freedom of Information Act of 1974, makes clear that top military brass took the incident very seriously. According to the memorandum, from details available at this hour, 1. Unidentified airplanes other than American Army or Navy planes were probably over Los Angeles and were fired on by elements of the 37th California Brigade, AA, between 3:12 and 4:15 a.m. These units expended 430 rounds of ammunition. As many as 15 airplanes have been involved, flying at various speeds from what is officially reported as being very slow to as much as 200 miles per hour, and the elevation from 9,000 to 18,000 feet. No bombs were dropped, no casualties among our troops, no planes were shot down, no American Army or Navy planes were in action. Investigation continuing. Marshall may have assumed that this memorandum, classified secret, would eventually be seen by a number of military and government personnel who were not entitled to his innermost thoughts. In any case, he left at least one provocative question literally hanging in the air. How could the U.S. coastal batteries fire for more than an hour at unidentified planes that were clearly visible to thousands of people on the ground, yet hit nothing? Did Marshall know, in fact, that one or more unidentified planes had been brought down during the incident? This is the conclusion one must draw from a second top-secret memorandum sent by Marshall to Roosevelt on March 5, 1942. This document, copies of which were mailed anonymously to several UFO researchers from a Sacramento, California address, stated in part, "It has been learned by Army G2 that Rear Admiral Anderson, Director of Naval Intelligence, has informed the War Department, now the Department of Defense, of naval salvage of one unidentified airplane off the coast of California. That, unlike the raid, has no bearing on conventional explanation. Further investigation has revealed that the Air Corps also recovered a small object in the San Bernardino Mountains, east of Los Angeles, which cannot be identified as conventional aircraft. This headquarters has come to a determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin. Based on this determination of interplanetary origin, Marshall informed Roosevelt that he had ordered the creation of a special intelligence unit to further investigate the phenomenon. This marked the inception of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, IPU. Although the second Marshall Memorandum is not as easily authenticated as the first, the existence of the IPU is well established. As discussed in the introduction of this book, likewise, the Los Angeles air raid involving multiple unknown aircraft sighted by thousands of witnesses and subjected to a blistering barrage of anti-aircraft fire is beyond dispute. What remains in question is, did one or more of the unknown craft crash that night, to be subsequently recovered by elements of the U.S. Navy and Army Air Corps? Apart from Marshall's second memorandum, evidence is in short supply. Perhaps the needed evidence remains hidden in some secret government archive, awaiting eventual release. And the next was pretty short too, might as well. England, World War II. According to late Gordon Crichton, a former diplomat intelligence officer and the editor of the magazine Flying Saucer Review, a UFO crashed on British soil at an unspecified point during the height of the Second World War, and it was subsequently retrieved and studied by British authorities. Crichton further stated that details of this early to mid 1940s crash, the precise date remains to be lost to the fog of time and official secrecy, were provided in 1955 to the late journalist and television personality Dorothy Killigan. It is a fact that in May 1955, Killigan made the following statement in an international news service cable that was subsequently published in the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper. I can report today on a story which is positively spooky, not to mention chilling. British scientists and airmen, after examining the wreckage of one mysterious flying ship, are convinced these strange aerial objects are not optical illusions or Soviet inventions, but are flying saucers which originate on another planet. The source of my information is a British official of cabinet rank who prefers to remain unidentified. We believe, on the basis of our inquiry thus far, that the saucers were staffed by small men, probably under 4 feet tall. It's frightening, but there's no denying the flying saucers come from another planet. This official quoted scientists as saying the flying ship of this type could not have possibly been constructed on Earth. The British government, I learned, is withholding an official report on the flying saucer examination at this time, possibly because it does not wish to frighten the public. When my husband and I arrived here from a brief vacation, I had no premonition that I would be catapulting myself into the controversy over whether flying saucers are real or imaginary. As to the identity of Killigan's surprisingly talkative source, Gordon Crichton stated that I had no doubt at the time as to who he was, a great leader and a servant of our country who has represented us well both in one of the highest of our military posts in World War II and the political sphere during the early post-war era. Our assumption at the time and in later years was that the official was Lord Louis Mountbatten. I wrote to Dorothy Killigan at once seeking further information, but never got a reply from her, and she died a few years later. We may take it as certain that she had been effectively silenced. Fragmentary data that may be related to the case has surfaced from a wide and varied body of investigators in 1958, and in a letter to Coral Lorenzen of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, APRO, the Brazilian UFO researcher Ovalo T. Fontes stated that he had learned of this retrieval on British soil in the 1940s from sources connected to Brazil's naval intelligence. Similarly, Leonard Stringfield uncovered very brief details of the case from a retired U.S. naval intelligence officer in 1977 while speaking on the UFO subject at the Cincinnati, Ohio chapter of the World Wings, and John Lear stated in 1988 that he had been informed by one of his sources that a UFO had been strapped to a Boeing B-17 aircraft and transported to the States. To date, that is where the data on this admittedly barely investigated case begins and ends. Nick Redfern is the primary investigator on the case. Footnotes. Unknown to Killigan, this assertion echoed the conclusions of a secret 1947 memorandum found only years after Killigan's death from Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, commander of the Air Materiel Command, to Brigadier General George Shulgin, head of Air Intelligence, entitled AMC Opinion Concerning Flying Discs. It states, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious." Twining, later appointed in 1957 by President Eisenhower as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, concluded the memo. It is recommended that a headquarters Army Air Force issue a directive assigning a priority security classification and code name for a detailed study of this matter to include the preparation of complete sets of all available and pertinent data, which will then be made available to the Army, Navy, Atomic Energy Commission, JRDB, the Air Force Scientific Advisory Group, NACA, and the RAND, Research and Development? I don't know. And NEPA projects. Lord Mountbatten, great-grandson of Queen Victoria, served with distinction in the Royal Navy during World War II. In 1941, Prime Minister Winston Churchill appointed Mountbatten head of the Combined Operations Command, promoting him to Vice Admiral, Lieutenant General, and Air Marshal at the culmination of his military career. He served as First Sea Lord 1955 through 1959 and Chief of Defense Staff 1959 through 1965. Louis Mountbatten was murdered by an IRA bomb while sailing near his holiday home in Ireland in 1979. And that's it. That's it for today. Yep, pretty much.